Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is all about doing the Women in the Middle show for 9 years. Kind of behind the scenes, chock full of reflections and insights. You are going to love today's show. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle with over 2 million downloads and counting. I am so grateful that the podcast world has brought us together. And for you, I wonder how long that's been. Whatever your answer, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your master certified coach, midlife life leadership mentor, and certified Zentangle teacher, and I am so happy to be here with you again. Now, before we dive into this fun, reflective, celebratory episode about making the podcast for 9 years, just a quick note. So if you listen to the show because you're thinking about your next chapter, that is perfect, because do I have a quiz for you? It's a quick way to discover what your life may actually be asking for next and what might be holding you back. I'd love to invite you to take it, and you can find it at www.midlifequiz.com. Again, that's www.midlifequiz.com. Okay, now let's dive in. So at the time of this recording, it was 9 years ago that I hit record on the first episode of the Women in the Middle Loving Life After 50 podcast. Women in the Middle Loving Life After 50. I was in my cedar closet, surrounded by clothes from the 90s. We have a really nice big cedar closet in the basement, although it's not that big. But there I was, sitting there, surrounded by all those clothes. It was great for sound. And it was cold in there, I have to say. Now I'm just at my desk because I didn't appreciate how good the mic was and what that would do to the sound. Anyway, I had no idea what I was actually starting. But here's the truth. I wasn't exactly ahead of the curve, technologically speaking, in any part of my life. I loved my BlackBerry for years. I loved it, even long after everyone else had moved on. I was late to get a smartphone too, and I didn't know the first thing about podcasts, but I'd always loved the art of the human speaking voice for a lot longer than that. Way back in third grade, so that would have been around 1971, 1972, I even asked for a cassette tape deck recorder for my birthday. Do you remember those? They were like flat, kind of long and flat. They were about the size of a good-sized book with the buttons on the top at one end. So you would lay it flat and there was a red record button, if I remember correctly, or maybe it had a dot on it, but you had to press that with the play button to record. Now, my cousin Bill and I had so much fun making spoof commercials, like flushing the tidy bowl man down the toilet, that kind of thing. And while I'm on the topic of toilet humor, one of my favorite things to do with the tape recorder was to go outside and walk along the creek in the backyard that connected my house with my friend's house. Anyway, we would record something that wasn't very ladylike, actually. Do you know what I'm going to say? Well, if you guessed farts, you're correct. And boy, did we laugh our heads off doing that for hours and hours on end. But seriously, over my lifetime, there was something special about storytelling and auditory education, like learning through listening, about a voice telling you something real that had always stuck with me, and it always kind of struck me and pulled me in. And I remember in high school, I loved listening to NPR, or National Public Radio, and then I moved to Canada and for university, and I found the same love for listening to the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I loved the interviews, the quirky shows, and being introduced to new music. CBC played an important role in helping me understand and learn about Canada when I moved here, for sure. Now, fast forward to 2013, and yes, pun intended and delightful, fast forward. I turned 50 then. I got laid off from a job that I'd had for a long time. And somewhere in figuring out what came next, I registered for life coach training. And that's where I met real people like me, who were entrepreneurs. I was not an entrepreneur yet, or they were wannabe entrepreneurs. That's what I was. And some of them had their own podcasts. I wasn't even a podcast listener at that time. I had no clue there was a podcast app on my phone either. But for the first time, it clicked. I could actually do this. And I absolutely noticed that idea was appealing to me somehow. I noticed it was like I did not gravitate toward YouTube or video or anything like that, but audio appealed to me. Now, 460 plus episodes later, here's the truth about endurance that nobody tells you in advance. I'm like telling you lots of truth bombs today. So when it comes to endurance, it's not one long streak of motivation. No, it is not. And that's not all. It's a string of individual weeks, most of them fairly ordinary, some of them hard, a few of them absurd, that you just keep showing up for. So about that time, I remember being introduced to a quote that really spoke to me. I didn't know it was a Pablo Picasso quote, but I looked it up just now, and it is. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. Now, I needed to say that twice so it would really sink in. This quote stopped me in my tracks. I always thought that to do something creative and inspired, you needed large chunks of time available to dive in, to dive deep. And this quote turned that idea upside down. Just start working, and that will change everything. I took that insight to heart, and it was one of the most powerful mindset shifts that I made that led to this milestone today. So 9 years in, here we are, episode after episode. And honestly, sometimes I have no clue what I'm going to say when I sit down. I don't know what I'm going to create. I don't know what's going to come out of my head. But I sit down and I get to work. That's what episodes are to me. They're like regularly scheduled accountability dates that I have with myself, with no certainty and sometimes not much clarity either until I get to work. So today, we're going to take a real look at what 9 years of weekly episodes actually look like, what it's like to create them, what they taught me, and what I'm still learning right now about how to keep doing it well. So for sure, we have to talk a little bit about discipline because I think most people get it wrong. They think discipline is about willpower, gritting your teeth, forcing yourself, and maybe that works for a week or so, maybe even a month. It does not work for 9 years. Not for me, that's for sure. What actually works is structure. I made a quick reference to this just now. For me, it's a Monday morning standing commitment to myself. Actually, I call it Podcast Monday. And it's a commitment I make to myself that doesn't need to be redecided every single week. I don't wake up on Monday and ask myself if I feel like recording. I just record. And if I don't get to the actual recording, then sometimes I stay up late to do it. Like if it's when everybody goes to bed, if it's not done yet, sometimes I do it in the middle of the night. And sometimes it might, like that little piece might get shifted to Tuesday morning, but I do everything I can to get it done on Monday. Now, I made that decision a long time ago. I remember somebody taught me about calendar blocking. That's what it is, calendar blocking. And when I learned that, I'm like, okay, I got to pick a day and stick with it. And I did. So that decision got made a long time ago. And then the system I created carries the rest. So if you're a regular listener, you know about my FUN framework. F stands for find your thoughts. U stands for understand what you want. And N stands for, and that's relevant right now, it stands for nurture your commitment to yourself. And that's what I do. And that's what it takes. You should see me in the morning when I get all my beverages ready to come sit down. So I have this special beverage I use for digestion, and then I make my coffee and my water. So I come to my office, to my desk chair, carrying these 3 containers of water and beverages, coffee and the other thing. And I sit down. I sit down and I have everything I need to get going. So for most of the 9 years, I've recorded about a week or 2 ahead of publishing. Now, I don't think that's the gold standard. I want to get to the point of being several weeks ahead, but I'm not there yet. I've tried batching content, like doing a whole bunch of content on the same day. Some people do 4 episodes in one day. I can't do it. It doesn't work for me. I can't remember what jokes I share. And, I don't want to be sharing the same joke 2 weeks in a row. You know what I mean? So it just doesn't work for me. So I'm not there yet. And I say yet because you never know. But here's where I am right now. My goal is to get 2 full weeks ahead. That would be awesome. And I want to try to do that within the next 6 weeks. So to go from 1 week ahead to 2 weeks ahead. And not because anything is wrong with 1 week. Technically it is if there are no hiccups, but more margin in my life, more wiggle room, more flexibility. It means more room for the reality of life. For a bad week, a trip, an injury, another commitment, anything that can come up. And I don't want it to bump into what you actually hear on the show. I would like to make sure I give myself enough space to go with the flow, to go with the, stuff that happens for real. Now, 9 years hasn't made me relaxed about discipline. If anything, it's made me more precise about it. So I know exactly where my little custom system is working and exactly where it still has room to grow. And I'd rather tell you both. So this is how it is. When I hear of my friends who have outlines and bullet points and they batch a few things together, 4 or 5 episodes, I'm like, whoa, I have them on a pedestal. I cannot do that, but I am working on making it a little easier for myself. Okay, now, if you've been listening for a while, you've probably noticed some repeat episodes along the way. I wanted to talk about that briefly because there are actually 2 different reasons for that, and they're not the same thing. So the first thing is it's intentional. Most people don't hear every episode, and some episodes are really core content material, right? And it has to do with the values and my practice, my approach. And, repetition is how the core ideas actually land because it's not like a book and everybody doesn't consume the podcast in the same order or at the same pace. So every once in a while, I put one in that's really important. So like I said, they don't get woven together in the same way. And sometimes once it's said, it's forgotten. So things have to be repeated on purpose. That's not me being like, in a rut, not having any ideas, although sometimes I do get tired. But that's teaching. It really is teaching. As a listener, I want you to really understand where I'm coming from and what matters in my coaching and what matters to keep us all moving forward, right? On the path to happiness and more fulfillment and getting unstuck. Now, the second thing is about the occasional repetition. Now, I've also gotten a little more comfortable as an older and wiser podcast host about putting on the occasional encore episode. Now, an encore episode is when I repeat an episode, but it's not because I want to repeat it on purpose. It's because life has gotten too busy or too difficult or shit hit the fan or something really big happened or whatever. I had to create something new that week and I just knew I couldn't manage it. So I did it intentionally, but for that reason, not specifically for teaching, although it does serve a dual purpose. But if you've been in the podcast community for a while and you've ever noticed one of those encore episodes, thank you so much for understanding because it really does mean more than you know, and I really don't want to get burnt out. So sometimes that's what happens. And, if you love podcasts, you've probably heard other hosts do it too. It's common. We've got plenty of podcast episodes, so many good ones, and sometimes your dear old host just needs a little bit of a break. Okay, so either way, the thing is that I have given myself permission. Now remember, I have a fuzzy blue wand on my desk, and imagine that wand bonking me on the head. Bing! Susie, you have permission to offer the occasional encore episode. And honestly, it plays such an important role at keeping the show sustainable. I'm very proud of this idea that I have not missed a week in 9 years. And, I don't like to think about it as a compromise. I like to think about it as a choice and a strategy for me to honor my commitment to you and to the show. So that's one of those little behind the scenes tricks. If you hear an encore episode, either I'm on a juicy vacation or something big happened and I need some wiggle room. Okay. So there are also some things I wanted to share with you, some standout moments from 9 years of the show. So I want to take a beat and talk about some of the highlights over the years. And 9 years and 468 plus episodes gives you some stories. So let me share a few of my favorites. I chose 7, and it wasn't easy to narrow them down. Okay, in no particular order, let's get going. Number 1, the hawk. A huge hawk, crashed into my sliding glass door with such a loud crashing sound. When I heard it, it was so jarring, I genuinely thought something had come through the roof of my house. I was so startled, I screamed out an actual F-bomb live on the recording. So the hawk, thankfully, was okay. Now, this sliding glass door is like 10 feet from where I'm sitting. It was okay. I ran over, I looked at him, he was upside down, and as soon as I started to move, he flipped over, and he flew up into a nearby tree to get his act together. Now, here's the part that still gets me, though. The guest that day was being interviewed about her breathable hemp-based nightgowns for menopausal women. So it turns out that she also knew, I didn't know this, but she knew like a whole lot about bird strike prevention. She was an expert in that area. She'd written about it. You just can't make this stuff up. So when I'm telling her about what happened, she goes, oh, and she just started telling me more about how to prevent bird strikes. And this remains the weirdest, most startling thing that has ever happened to me, mid-recording. It was really crazy. Anyway, that was the hawk. Number 2, Elaine Lillane. Now, I had the privilege of interviewing an amazing woman, Elaine Lillane, when she was 99. I think it was last year. She's the first lady of fitness. She was married to Jack LaLanne, you may recall. He was a television star, and he sold all kinds of things. He did an exercise show, and he sold a juicer, and so many more things. Like, it's unbelievable how many things he invented. Anyway, she popped onto my Zoom square herself. No help from anyone at 99 years old. I imagined a publicist. She was promoting a book about her husband to honor her husband and keep his legacy alive. And I was sure that a publicist would be sitting there with her, helping her get on Zoom. But no, that was another time that I caught myself thinking something about aging and what it meant. I mean, this happens on occasion. We all do. Anyway, she was amazing. So if you ever want proof that aging is a privilege and not necessarily a downhill slide to the finish line, talk to a 99-year-old who can handle her own tech better than half of my guests half her age. And for sure, I'm in that category too. So to hear this episode, go to number 408, How to Live a Healthy, Active, Passion-Filled Life at 99 with Elaine Lillane. Okay, number 3, the Arboretum. So during COVID, my husband, my dog Nico the Noof, one of my sons, and we took a fall walk at the Arboretum at my alma mater, where my son also went. It was so much fun that he went to the same school I did. It was such a beautiful autumn day, and when I was a student there, I loved walking around the Arboretum. It was a perfect temperature, blue sky, perfect, except the bathrooms were closed. So, as you can imagine, I got worried, as one does. So it took a while, but I finally found a tree. Now, I have to say, it was such a beautiful day that there were so many people in the Arboretum. It was hard to find some privacy, but eventually I found a tree that would work. And I did what I had to do, and I was genuinely proud of myself for managing that deep squat in my mid-50s at that time. When I was in the deep squat, I actually remember thinking, wow, look at me, pretty good for my age. Until I realized I'd peed on my pants. I didn't get the memo about exactly how to squat and lean. I had to ask my son to hose me down with water from the dog's hydration pack in public. We have one of those backpacky things that bikers would wear. It's just easier to walk around. And Nico was a big dog and we needed lots of water. Anyway, I thought, ooh, he can just hose me down with this. I had to ask my son at my alma mater with my husband standing right there too. And my son rolling his eyes right back, right all the way back into his head. Oh my God, it was so embarrassing and so funny. And it's still one of my favorite family stories 9 years later. So to listen, go to episode 172, Midlife Stories on Purpose. I think you'll get a kick out of that. Okay, number 4, Joan London. I got to interview Joan London, who hosted Good Morning America for 20 years. She was promoting her book, Why Did I Come Into This Room? We can all relate to that, right? And in the middle of our conversation, she told a hilarious story about a Spanx bathroom emergency. She shares all the details of what can happen when you get that urgency feeling, but this time she was in a fancy beaded gown, and she tells a great story. 20 years on national television, and she was just as real and as unguarded as anyone I've ever had on the show. Not every midlife podcast host gets a guest like that, and I still don't take it for granted. So you can listen to this one. That's episode 359, Encore, A Candid and Humorous Look at Aging with Joan London. Okay, number 5, The Rooster Cookbook. Now, somewhere along the way, I searched for my own book on Amazon. So if you don't know, back in 2021, I wrote a book called 50 Ways to Celebrate Life After 50. So when you write a book, you typically search it and see how your customer might find it and experience, your book online. So I was doing that. It just came out and I was searching it on Amazon. And right there in the results, right next to my sweet little book for midlife ladies, was another book. And to my shock and surprise, it was called 50 Ways to Eat Cock, Healthy Chicken Recipes with Balls by Adrienne N. Hugh. Now, there's a picture of a rooster on the cover. And yes, you heard me correctly. I still don't know what to do with that information except share it with you and perhaps get the author on this podcast. To hear this one, you can go to episode 186, What Makes You Squirm in Midlife. Enjoy. Okay, number 6, Podcast-thon. Every year, thousands of podcasters around the world take part in something called Podcast-thon. We each interview a charity or nonprofit, and all the episodes release the same week. That's how I met the team from the Cape May Marine Mammal Research Center, the nonprofit arm of the Cape May Whale Watch and Research Center. Getting the chance to sit down with whale and dolphin experts genuinely lit me up. I couldn't believe it. 9 years in, I still get surprised by where this show takes me. I got to sit down with somebody who owned one of those boats, a whale watch boat. So to hear this one, you can head over to episode 400, Doing What You Love, Protecting Whales and Dolphins with Cape May Marine Mammal Research Center. It's awesome. And I actually also really enjoyed the second opportunity I had with Podcast-thon. I did another interview with somebody related to animals. Amazing. It was on episode 451, Reconnecting People with Their Natural World Through Wildlife Rehabilitation with Hope Swinimer. Amazing. So I think you will really love these episodes. They're awesome. And number 7, last but certainly not least, Pathetic Panties. And one of my most popular episodes of all time is the one about wearing what I call pathetic panties. This calls out all of us who need to finally get rid of those pathetic old panties and replace them as an act of self-care. I still have women sending me emails because they just threw out a bad pair. You got to check this one out. This was originally recorded for episode number 6 and has been put out as an encore episode. Episode 306, Underwear, Self-Care, and You in Midlife, an encore episode. You'll really enjoy that for sure. Okay, now I want to talk to you a little bit about what my listeners have taught me over the years. Specifically, I want to share something I learned in the early days of this podcast because it changed how I show up every single week since. I learned it was okay to let my freak flag fly. It was a listener review that taught me that. She wrote about listening to the podcast in her car. Unfortunately, I couldn't put my finger on this review, but I have memory about basically what it said. She said something about dropping her kid off at college, and she was actually in the middle of a 5-hour drive back home, something like that. She was emotional, and she said the blend of authenticity and humor was greatly appreciated. that my laughter and my silliness helped her get through a genuinely difficult moment. That review changed something in me. I realized that my giggling, my goofiness, it wasn't something to tone down or apologize for. It was doing something real for people in a moment that I never would have imagined. I didn't expect it. I thought professional meant polished, buttoned up, a certain kind of credible. And what I learned instead from the people actually listening was that, being silly here and there, sometimes telling a wacky, ridiculous story, being fully unguarded, that by itself wasn't a liability. It was the thing that seemed to be working. And that's still true 9 years later. When I look back at what listeners have said to me over the years, 3 things keep showing up, and none of them are about polish. The first is that people describe the podcast the way you describe a friend. My new best friend on commutes, like catching up with an old friend, the common sense friend we all want in our corner. Nobody says that about a podcast that feels produced at them. You've all heard podcasts that are so smooth and so produced. It's not the same thing. They say it about something that feels like a person. The second is a version of I'm not alone. I found my people. Every woman over 50 should be listening, helping listeners pause and reconnect with what matters most. That's the actual thing I set out to do, whether or not I had the words for it 9 years ago. And the third, this one might surprise you because it's the opposite of freak flag energy. People also say I do my homework. I'm not winging it. And that I get straight to the heart of things. Advice without the fluff. And I have to say, this is true. I do my homework. So here's what I think all of this means 9 years in. Being unguarded and being credible were never actually in tension. I just thought they were. I really had it in my mind that they were very separate things. The version of me that lets herself be a little ridiculous, a little silly, is the same version of me who shows up prepared every single week. And it turns out it's not a contradiction. Isn't that great? It's the whole thing. That's just how I figured it out. And then there's 2 more brief things I want to sign off with today. First, I want to share a little bit of a progress update, so to speak, about technology and me. So I started this podcast experience way back in 2017, being absolutely freaked out by the tech needed to create the show. If the settings changed on their own in my recording app, and sometimes they do on more than one occasion, my heart would start to race and I would sweat. Like I would actually shake a little bit. My heart was racing and I was sweating. I had no confidence that I could get things to work again. Because, when we grew up with floppy disks, if something happened, that's it, done. Something would blow up. That's what it felt like. If you're going to lose something, it's gone forever. I really didn't believe that I could fix it, that I could get things to work again. And I'm happy to say that this no longer happens. Now, I can't always get everything to work again, but when it comes to recording the show, sure, I still flub lines as I'm recording, and I have an editor, thank goodness. But as far as the tech drama goes, it is way better. I know I need to slow down and Google it, and I'll usually be fine. So when something happens like that, I just remind myself, I think a special thought. The thought is, I'm learning to become a woman who knows how to run the tech she needs for her business. Honestly, that's what I think. I'm learning to become that woman. I don't need to be a rock star in technology. I just need to know how to keep it moving forward. So usually it's slowing it down, Googling it, sometimes rebooting, and everything's okay. So that's that. Wanted to give you a little update on that because I know I've talked about technology issues many times over the years. And finally, I have a request for some help. There's one guest out there that I would love to have a conversation with on this show. We pretty much all grew up with her. We admired her. We thought she was the grooviest girl around. And that guest is no other than Maureen McCormick, a.k.a. Marsha Brady of the Brady Bunch. Boy, did we have her on a pedestal. She excelled at being a cool kid, especially in her teens, didn't she? I would love to hear what she thinks about midlife and navigating this time of life. So ladies, if you can pull any strings, if anybody has a contact, please do. I have tried in the past. I haven't gotten anywhere yet. But women in the middle have a special place in their hearts for Marsha, and it would really be fun to have her on. So 9 years of showing up for you every week has taught me something for sure. The biggest shifts in midlife rarely start with a big decision. They start with a question, and it always has to do with curiosity. Curiosity is everything. We have to ask more questions, and we'll keep making progress. So if this episode got you thinking about your own next chapter, if you got a little bit more curious or inspired, I would love to invite you to take my midlife quiz. It is a quick way to discover what your life might be asking for next. Are you curious about that? I bet you are. And what might be holding you back? That's really a huge part of the equation too. So if you're curious, go ahead and take that quiz at www.midlifequiz.com. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for 9 years, and here's to many more to come. All right, my friend, that's what I've got for you today. I just realized there's one other thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if you know, but there's this global ranking for podcasts, and I've been very pleased and shocked and grateful over the last couple of years that my show went from the top 1% globally to the top 0.5% globally. And I remember how exciting that was when that happened a couple of years ago. So that's of all podcasts globally. That's great. And if it wasn't for listeners like you, that would not be happening. We wouldn't be able to connect with as many amazing women in the middle. Okay. So if this episode resonated or inspired you, please share it with a midlife woman in your life who would get something out of it. And maybe she doesn't even know that she's got like a podcast app right on her phone. As I like to say, it's like a party in your purse, you know? A podcast is like a party in your purse. So if you're enjoying the show, a 5-star review goes a long way in helping other women find it too. So if you haven't done that yet, you can go ahead and leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. iTunes is where most of them are, so anything you could do would be awesome. For show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and look for episode 470. And don't forget to check out the Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. It's my other show all about the reality of running a business as a midlife woman. It's everywhere you listen to podcasts. Now, being the queen of your brain domain is the best way to be. It's time to stop waiting and start choosing. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.